I am showing the top of the hour. Let me go ahead and get my paperwork in order. We're going to get started in probably less than 1 minute. I'm going to get that recording started and then off we're going to go. So with that, I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you making time for us. And for those who got here early, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the recorder. And we are recording. Next slide, please. Well, welcome everybody. We know that you have many choices when choosing your professional development, and there are many opportunities here at the University of Arizona Global Campus for professional development training. So thank you for choosing Ed Talks, brought to you by the Department of Education and Liberal Arts here at the Global Campus. I'm Jackie Kiger, and I'm going to be your host today, and I appreciate you being here. This is our 7th presentation in our 8th series of education talks for this year. Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks. This year is all about multipliers and the awareness of its importance that author Liz Wiseman has made known in her New York Times bestseller, Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. Our focus today will be on the topic of the accidental diminisher. Now, here to help us explore and extend Wiseman's foundational concept of the accidental diminisher with her story is our own Dr. Kathleen Pierce Friedman. Now, as you listen to her story, you might listen for your call to action in sharing your practices that support a culture of leadership and that multiplier effect within your classroom or interactions with your colleagues. Or perhaps you'll find a new practice that her story sparks for you. Hey, Kathleen, can you go ahead and come on camera and say hello as I introduce you?
Hi.
Well, I'd like to take a moment and formally introduce you all to Kathleen. Dr. Pierce Friedman is an assistant professor here in the Department of Education and Liberal Arts at the university. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in British military history. Kathleen and I are in the same department, and we are always connecting and sharing on military history as, for me, a hobby. And as well, she holds a doctorate in the K through 12 future studies and a master's in education administration. Now, Dr. Friedman holds multiple teaching credentials in multiple states, and as you'll learn more about today, her first teaching position was at an inner city elementary school. Now, here at the university, within the Master of Arts in Education program, Kathleen has developed several of the courses, as well as teaching with a focus on the capstone courses for students as they're about to graduate from their program of study. As you hear Kathleen's soft-spoken tone, her indoor voice, as we say in K through 12, don't let that fool you. Dr. Friedman encourages students to advocate for themselves when their path to a degree seems overwhelming. She'll tell them, take chances, speak up, and take a different path. You'll get to the end if you strive to achieve, and you and your family will be so thankful that you did. She lives in Point Roberts, Washington. And if you don't know where that is, think very northwest, as it requires you to drive through not one, but 2 US-Canada borders to come visit her on the Pinclave, where her and her husband and her 3 sons enjoy the great outdoors. Today is Kathleen's first Ed Talk, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. So please join me in welcoming a natural-born storyteller, Dr. Kathleen Pierce Friedman. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here with us today. Next slide, please. I'm going to ask that we remove our videos so that we can get started. And as a reminder, Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks. the ever popular way of sharing personal stories for only 18 minutes of monologue. We do this because we want to hear your stories, and we can best do that by sharing our stories. Our storytelling approach is geared to not take a lot of your time, but rather to simply set the stage for an interactive conversation and perhaps encourage you to encourage your learners around the idea of what it means to have an accidental diminisher getting in the way of their learning. And at the end of our Ed Talk today, we look forward to learning your story of what you are doing or will do in your approach to avoid becoming an accidental diminisher. Next slide, please. But for now, please hold your questions, hold your chat comments to the end, as I don't want you to miss a single word. And with that, Kathleen, the microphone is yours.
Thanks, Jackie. As I sat across the table in the summer of 1991, looking at a piece of paper with pen in hand, I questioned my decision. I looked around the room and saw so many other pre-service teachers contemplating maybe the same decision. I felt like one daisy in a field of daisies. Should I sign? We had all just been through a group interview, sitting in a local high school auditorium. There must have been at least 40 of us. We were told that if we left without signing, that there would be a possibility we would not be called back for another interview. What would that mean for my future? I thought if I signed, would it take me so far away from my dreams? As I sat there, I thought to myself, why had I not stayed put in the old, dark, possibly rat-infested military archives? I had spent a grueling 4 years working towards my BA in military history, something that was not easy, being a woman and in a field where traditionally only men excelled. And yet here I sat looking at a piece of paper that would change my life path and take me out of my passion of history. Should I sign it? With my military history degree in hand, I signed the teaching contract to become a first grade elementary teacher and left my hopes of going back to school for my master's in public history behind. What I thought would be taking my dreams and tossing them aside instead changed my life forever and took me into a very rewarding career. I was shocked I got the job, but it was a time in California where they were pushing 20-1 in grades K through 3, and I was at the right place at the right time. The school district had become what Liz Weitzman notes as a rapid responder. The district leader was quick to take action. They were building a team of exceptional educators to meet the new mandated 20-1. Or were they? They were well intended, but at what cost was it to the students, community, and ultimately the teachers that were hired? Teaching started in the fall, and while all leaves looked the same, they were not. It was my first year of teaching. I taught 19 first grade students on the school stage. I was one of the lucky new teachers and wasn't forced into a janitor's closet or teaching on the covered playground. Because while the district was going 20-1, they did not think about the ramifications of lack of classrooms to meet new student mandates. During breakfast, lunch, and afternoon snack, I would scream at my students so they could hear me over the cafeteria noise. But in all reality, it probably didn't matter what I was saying because only one of my students had a native language of English. The rest of my students were Hmong, Spanish, or Eastern European. While you may not think that is a difficult group of students, let me tell you a little about them. My Hmong students were split into two groups, white Hmong and green blue Hmong, which are named after the traditional colors worn by women of the different groups. All of my Hmong students had never seen a written language, as a written language for Hmong was developed in Laos in the early 1950s, and many of their parents were uneducated and so did not even know the written language. My Spanish-speaking students were refugees from Guatemala and Colombia. Their parents as well, for the most part, were migrant farm workers with little education. And finally, my Eastern European students, whose parents were asylum seekers from Yugoslavia before the Bosnian War of 1992. Many were, for the most part, still terrified of communism and were very leery of anyone, let alone a teacher. Many of my students would come to class only a few days a week. The days they didn't come, they were working with their parents in the fields or taking care of their younger siblings so their parents could work. I fought so hard. I was going to plant those seeds of knowledge that first year to make a difference for my sweet 19 first graders. For many of them, I was their American mom, helping them traverse the difficulties of American life as a youth in an inner city school. My heart broke for them and seeing how scared they were day in and day out. By the time the end of the year rolled around, I was physically and emotionally spent. I survived my first year barely. Many of my friends had quit their teaching. I too thought about leaving the profession and going back to that dark, damp, possibly rat-infested archival room. But my Jewish grandmother, my Bubby, her words rang in my head. Tamid Lakid, which is loosely translated in Hebrew for keeping going. I had made a commitment to teach, and every year it had to get better. So with that in mind, I signed my second contract. My second contract wasn't for one more year. It was for a permanent teaching contract for 5 years. It sealed my fate with that signing. I would not be returning to obtain my master's in public history. The fate had been sealed in that signing. The school district had become what Liz Weitzman notes as an accidental diminisher. They had the best of intentions in meeting the state requirements, but at the cost of so many teachers who would have failing careers. It was a joke my second year of teaching to see a rare rhino, someone who had survived their first year and signed up for a permanent contract. By year 2, I was gifted a classroom. My sweet 19 had become second graders, still limited in their English language development, but learning slowly. Like trees in a forest, my students were becoming very different to me. I was seeing them as the brilliant leaves they were becoming. I felt so guilty my second year of teaching, as I had a classroom, while others were stuck in the janitor's closet or outside on the playground for another year. In fact, I felt so sorry for the teacher who taught under the covered playground. I split my classroom in half and we co-taught, taking turns at the blackboard and sharing an already small space. We had become friends. Who couldn't in such a cramped space? And often we questioned our teaching methods at the end of the day, how we were simply going through the motions. We had yet to understand the multiplier effect. What Wiseman notes is knowing your vulnerabilities are, spotting them in action, and turning those situations into multiplier moments. It was as if fate was on our side and heard our plea for help with teaching. Our principal at the staff meeting told us we were moving to an accelerated schools model the following year. The accelerated schools model was designed to accelerate the learning of at-risk children by treating them as gifted and talented students at a time when most programs favored slower, remedial, drill and kill lessons. and worksheets that cause them to drop further behind their advantaged peers. In the accelerated model, everyone is involved in taking stock, including the principal, teachers, staff, parents, janitors, cooks. And thinking back on the principal, I can now see how she was what Wiseman notes as a strategist, a big thinker who cast a compelling vision, thinking they were showing people a better place and providing the big picture. While the accelerated schools model was a unique idea, it made all my students the same. They were no longer individual learners. The accelerated schools model went off the following school year, my third year of teaching, like gangbusters. We were all invested and ready for a change in our students, and more importantly, in our teaching. My sweet 19 had become third graders that fall, and I was ready to accelerate their learning. California announced that they were giving performance bonuses that year. Any teacher whose students scored at a certain level on the state exam would receive a bonus at the end of the school year. The bonus was large. It was the equivalent for many of us of a 2-month paycheck. I was excited. I thought that with the new program, my students would excel and I would be rich come summer. Well, that was not the case. With any new program that had so many demands, my students can keep up. And I lost many of my students who were on the cusp of meeting grade level. Those bubble kids, we would call them, were now failing miserably. They couldn't keep up with the workload requirements. I was passing out so many exemplars and study guides that I was diminishing their higher level thinking development. I needed to start drawing the line between investing and diminishing. So I went back to my old methods of teaching, my dreams of a rich summer diminishing. But I was going to ensure that my third graders could at least write their name, do simple math, and read at a minimum of second grade level. I was going to ensure that Maria was able to count change so that when she went to the gas station with her little sister to get bread and milk, she would not be shortchanged by the clerk. I wanted to make sure that Q was able to write his name in English. So when he was asked his name, he could not only spell it, but also write it. I wanted to make sure that Anna could memorize and write her address and phone number to get help if needed. So if me only getting them to a basic survival skills makes me sound like a real easy teacher, I want you to know that the only education many of my sweet 19 may achieve was with me, and I wanted to give them some type of skills. By spring break that year, much of the school had quit the accelerated model, and the principal was off and running on to a new idea to meet standards. The school district was doing the best they could with what they had, and there was always a hum in the air about next year. The next year, my principal would say, would be better. But for my sweet 19, for many of them, there was no next year. Many of my students dropped out by fourth grade. My sweet 19 was no more. It was an accident that I got such a difficult class for a teacher who did not have an English language learner credential. It was an accident that I was put on the stage yelling over breakfast, lunch, snack time, and the smell of cafeteria food. However, accident or not, this was the catalyst for who I am today and how I look at my teaching and my students in the classroom. I was given a gift those first few years of teaching, as I believe those difficult experiences make me who I am today. Had I been given a typical first grade classroom, my first year of teaching, I would not be the teacher who I am today. I may not be here supporting and guiding pre-service teachers to survive their first few years of teaching. Wiseman notes that there are accidental diminishers in everyone's life. Accidental diminishers are managers who, despite their very best of intentions, have a diminishing impact on the people they lead. My first few years of teaching were difficult, to say the least, and I had an accidental diminisher as my first school principal. She would often call staff meetings that lasted 2 hours. As I look back and reflect on those 2-hour meetings, I can't help but wonder if a simple email would have been a better use of our time instead of sitting in such a long meeting. We were asked to serve on several committees. We all agreed for fear of missing important information or not being seen as a team player. Our workload continued to increase, and yet the focus really should have been on our students and not what should have fallen on school administration. Wiseman notes increasing your self-awareness may help you to reduce the tendencies as an accidental diminisher. And I believe my first few years of teaching gave me the gift of self-awareness and seeking help without diminishing others. Or did they? Well, it wasn't always clear, and I wasn't always sure of my direction. When I think about my time in those first 5 years of public school teaching and connect it to my work now as an open enrollment educator at UAGC, I wonder how many times I'm getting in the way of my students' learning. Am I what Wiseman notes as an accidental diminisher, a rescuer, an empathetic leader who is quick to help when they see people struggling? As an open enrollment educator, I think of every classroom as a running race. Some students will start the race on an empty stomach. Some may not know how to run. Some may not be in the right shoes, and some may not have shoes. In the end, it really doesn't matter as long as they achieve the college experience. They understand how to manage their time, work to complete something, develop a work ethic, and then the ultimate finish of the race with their diploma in hand. I didn't get to study history, but I feel like I made history. This was several decades ago. When I think back on my sweet 19, who I taught for 3 years in a public inner city school, I think about Q. Did he finally write his name legibly, or did he change it to a more American name? How about Anna? Was she able to convince her parents to buy a TV so they could possibly learn English from watching American television? Or Maria, was she finally able to count change exactly so she wouldn't be embarrassed about holding out her hand while the gas station clerk picked out the correct change to buy the bread and milk? All of these students are now in their 30s, with, I'm sure, families of their own. Some may have gone back to their home country. Some may not have survived their new American world. But I know, for one, my teaching made all the difference in their life. Shoshana was one of my sweet 19. We attended the same synagogue for years and have kept in touch. Shoshana just finished her master's degree at the University of Michigan and started her first teaching job in the fall of 2020. I saw the tears in her eyes when she told me that she wasn't sure she was going to make it, teaching in a virtual setting, how her principal was demanding more and expecting perfection. I told her this story of my sweet 19, of the hopes of offering some guiding light. She told me that she never knew as a child the challenges I was facing being her teacher, only that I inspired her to become a teacher. She is now in her second year of teaching and having great success despite the challenges. As Wiseman notes, at times we're all going to be accidental diminishers, but we need to minimize it. We need to be careful about diminishing our students. We need to help them navigate to the writing center, Turnitin, Grammarly, so forth. We need to guide them to be successful and not be a diminisher, a protector, a rescuer, and a rapid responder? So I ask you all these questions as you teach and lead. How might I be shutting down the ideas and actions of my students despite my best intentions? What am I inadvertently doing that might have a diminishing impact on my students' success? How might my intentions be interpreted differently by my students? What messages might my actions actually be conveying to my students? What could I do differently as an open enrollment educator to make a difference? I'm not saying don't give extensions. Students need extensions. I'm not saying do not provide exemplary papers, but maybe don't give it to the whole class. Don't give them one if they don't need it, because not all students need exemplars. In fact, some need the challenge to figure it all out. Sometimes what they turn in is far better than the exemplar you would have provided. What about if Q was in your class? Are you being an accidental diminisher? Lashana Tova, thank you. Back to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you very much for sharing your story. A story that landed you in the classroom as a first-year teacher, a direction that moved you from your love of history to that of making history, especially in the lives of those 19 young students that you so affectionately refer to as your sweet 19. It seems the best laid plans can lead to leaders getting in their own way. It was not enough for your principal to manage the crisis that the state had imposed. As in your example, while the best intentions were sought, accidental diminishing prevailed in resource after resource after resource. As you shared your story, I thought of how a row of dominoes can fall with only the push of one. It'll impact the whole system of dominoes. And while leadership and teachers can unintentionally topple the system, it topples nonetheless. I appreciate how you shielded your sweet 19 from the inertia of a falling classroom in a cafeteria, from that curriculum where one size was supposed to fit all. And I can only imagine the lengths that you went through in communicating with those parents during parent-teacher conferences. I could see you physically placing yourself between your sweet 19 and the falling dominoes of best intentions by a school systems whose battles cry is often, "This room will have to do," or the battle cry of, "Next year will be better." Better for who? For Anna? For Q? For Shoshana? Or Maria? I have to wonder, how many of your students then are our students now? And if not exactly them, then who they represent in those same journeys and experiences that we receive our students. Kathleen, I appreciate your story. And it leaves me as an educator asking myself, are my good classroom intentions detracting from my student success? Am I paying attention to the shoes my online students give me a glimpse of as they make those weekly introductions, week one? Am I simply passing out help with the best intentions that end up diminishing my students' critical thinking and creativity? Is giving them too much? Too much. Thank you, Kathleen. audience members, as we invite you to consider and share in the chat, but we'd also love to hear from you to share with us using the audio feature. Simply raise your hand using the hand icon on the bottom of your screen, and we'll give you the opportunity to unmute your microphone and share your story or your reflection of Kathleen's story and perhaps what you'll be doing or are doing in your classroom to avoid being that accidental diminisher. We invite you to join the conversation to inspire others with your stories. Okay, Frank, give me 1 second and I'll give you the microphone here. I was having trouble moving over there, but 1 second. Oh, I had it. Do you have the microphone now, Frank?
I think so.
Okay, you do, sir. Thank you. My apologies.
No worries. And Kathleen, thank you so much for such an inspiring story. I was reminded of an amazing quote by Dr. Maria Montessori, who said, "Never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed." And it just resonated for me, your story of how we sometimes get in children's way and our students' way by trying to provide the supports we think they might need without first giving them that opportunity to endeavor on their own and realize that success that they initiate before we come to the rescue sometimes. So thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, Frank. And you know, that's kind of a tough one because we think we know, and we oftentimes teach the same course over and over, and so we become ready. And it's very easy to tell students what they need without ever pausing to find out what they need. So I see some other hands are up. Let me see if I can go to my participant list. Joseph.
They're all set, Jackie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing that, Jesse.
Let's see, is this audio coming through?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the interesting speech and motivating as well. I wanted to ask you, though, if you think that there are any differences between, say, elementary education and college education in terms of expectations. And what I mean is, like with elementary students, I suppose you want to pick up and help and further and advance every single student. You know, the task is really to get them going, regardless of where they are. But with college, don't we begin with some expectations and, you know, certain standards that we expect of even the minimal students? Whereas, you know, in the elementary, there is no floor. Pick up everyone and lift them. I'm wondering, or do you approach college education with exactly the same attitude and really lack of expectations as you do with perhaps elementary? I don't know if you could comment on that broadly. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that I have lack of expectations for my students here at UAGC. What I hope is that I'm giving them life skills, which is the same that I wanted to give my elementary students, which was life skills. True, college students come to us with more background knowledge, but I can't help but every time I start a new class, I think about who we serve, and who we serve for the most part, they may be the first person in their family to go to college. And so they may not have that background knowledge of what it means to be successful at college. Just like my students in the elementary, for the most part, they were first generation American. They weren't born in the States. They had no idea what it meant to go to school, what it meant to be a learner. And that's the same for many of my students who I teach. I always think of them as, what skills can I give you to be successful? And that's what I had in the back of my mind when I taught elementary school as well.
Does that help, Joseph?
Yes, thank you. It's just the question of, no, I agree with everything you said. It's with the elementary school students, you don't have any demands to begin with. And it's a very, psychologically and pedagogically complex thing though. But so how to handle that? Whereas with college students, we do have some initial demands. And I just find that it's hard to manage that a little bit. It's a little bit different from the elementary school, but I appreciate everything that you said and the spirit of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think there's probably, and I can't speak to this, Kathleen would be the expert in the room here with our panelists today about elementary. I was a high school teacher before I moved into higher ed. But hearing my wife come home every day for 20 years as an elementary school teacher, I know there's standards and I know there's expectation and there's that goal of getting them to that, state standard in many cases. And as we look at what we do here at the university, there's the same expectation, the CLOs, the course learning objectives, as students enter, we want them all to meet that. And to me, the message here, what resonates in all of this, and we've seen this, we've seen students putting their best foot forward that come to us from a dual language background. And so they have growth opportunities in writing and APA format and things of that nature. And then socially and economically, as Kathleen shared with her students, first generation and different limited resources that they would have, we see that in our classroom. And so for me, I try to get a lot of value, because you make a good point, Joseph, is I want them to complete the course, not because I was very liberal in my thinking and grading, but because I was able to coach them to that CLO expectation. And I try to do that with all my students. And so, that's the goal. But I best do that in week one when I pause and, in the example, the metaphor, and look at the shoes. What can I gather? What can I take in from what's happening in that week one conversation of what they're willing to share with me about who they are and where they come from and that expectation? Some will come right out and talk about the excitement of being a first generation college student, and others who are in the same situation say nothing. So it does take a bit of work, and we don't always find out, but I think we should try and be mindful of that. So thank you for reminding us that there is that standard, and we want all of our students to reach that. So
thank you.
I see where Stephanie has posted. Stephanie Fink in the chat, I appreciate your story as it pertains quite a lot to the experiences of her daughter. And by the way, congratulations, your daughter. I just recently graduated college as an educator there. And so we look forward to her carrying on your family tradition, Steph. So thank you. And then John Barlow. Hi, John. He started off on the stage. That it almost feels like a compliment when I started teaching on the stage. Well, the stage of a cafeteria, because there just wasn't room. And, if we go back a few decades, I think we can all remember the K through 12 situation in most every state in the union here had to make drastic changes in education. When No Child Left Behind came about, with that, a lot of mandate at the state level happened, and it did mean hiring teachers without classrooms and then having to do makeshift cafeteria situations.
So Dr. Olson Stewart asked, how do you take the same lessons you learned today to your online classroom? I think we are all used to being the helpers and are unsure where to step in and help, and when we should hold back and allow the productive struggle to happen. It's something I still struggle with is, am I providing too much help? Because I do tend to be a helper as well. It's my background. I'm the youngest of 5 children, so I am definitely the helper. I am definitely the pleaser of the family, and I carry that into my teaching. I really do try to, that introduction is read and listen to every single student's story. And I have a spreadsheet where I make a note. If they tell me they're first generation college, I make that note. If they tell me that their parents have gone to college or that they live in an inner city school, in an inner city, I make note of, even if they live in a rural area, I try to just dissect who my students are and then try to help each one individually. And I do reach out that first week with an email to every single student and say, how can I help you succeed? Because I teach in the capstone, I teach the last course these students are going to take, and I want them to finish strong. So I ask them, how can I help you? How can I help you finish strong? Some don't write me back, and that's okay, because then I know they've got it. They're good to go. And some do write me back and say they're good to go, or they need help with, they really struggled with their APA and now they're going to go into the classroom, and can I help them? And I have just a bank of items that I help them with, but I really try to draw the line of over helping and directing them. The old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And that's the same thing, as I try to help them find the water and not necessarily give them the water.
That's a very good point. And as we wrap up our time here, I do want to mention what Lori says about me in the chat. She went out of her way to post that, kind of boils down, I'm going to paraphrase, meeting the students where they're at. And we've talked about that before. And the way that you meet students where they're at is Kathleen's point of, you pay attention to what they tell you in those introductory meetings of week 1, and then also you frame your presence as an instructor. You frame your questions not to be nosy and driven, but to be inviting and welcoming, so that students feel comfortable sharing. So, Lori, I appreciate you saying that, meeting students where they're at. While our time is winding down, and as you know, all good things must come to an end. So next slide, please. Please watch the chat box or your screen for a link to the Ed Talk homepage, where this recorded Ed Talk will be archived for future viewing, along with the certificates of participation. You'll also find a link to the Ed Talk homepage in today's invitation. We want to, again, acknowledge the work of Liz Wiseman and her Multiplier book for the inspiration for today's Ed Talk, as well as the rest of our series this year. Be sure and mark your calendars and be watching for the October invite for our next Ed Talk session, where on the 21st of October, Dr. Jessica Upshaw will be your host, and I'll be sharing with you on the topic of dealing with diminishers as we continue the conversation of multipliers. We thank you for joining us today, and a huge thank you again to Dr. Kathleen Friedman for sharing with us and to inspire our next steps in supporting our students and each other. On behalf of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Tony Farrell, and your friends here at the Department of Education and Liberal Arts at the University of Arizona Global Campus, we thank you for being here, and we'll see y'all next month. Thank you.